Good morning, everyone. Here's your Mormon news update for November 4th, 2025. Today we're going to start at the Deseret News, where it says a chief desire of all Christian grandparents is that their grandchildren and great-grandchildren follow Jesus Christ, and President Dallin H. Oaks and Sister Kristen Oaks are no different. President Oaks and his late wife June Dixon Oaks had 5 children. Now President and Sister Oaks have 29 grandchildren, 73 great-grandchildren, and 2 great-great-grandchildren. His descendants say President Oaks is a kind, approachable, thoughtful grandfather who thinks of them and has time for them. And here are the 5 things that the article lists that Oaks does to lead his grandchildren toward Jesus Christ: pointing his posterity toward Easter and the atonement of Jesus Christ, sharing lessons from prophets and apostles, grandchild of the month, learning the living Christ and other family-wide efforts, and teaching his family to fish. Now, for more information about Dallin H. Oaks' posterity, let's go to an article from the Daily Mail that says, "The grandson of a Mormon apostle has shared about his life growing up gay and the church's inability to accept his sexuality. In a poignant reflection of his upbringing, Jared Oaks, a 42-year-old music director for Ballet West, shares his journey with the Salt Lake Tribune and how he went from a shy Latter-day Saint teenager grappling with his sexuality in the late 1990s to an advocate for LGBTQ+ awareness and acceptance today. Growing up in Tacoma, Washington, Oaks internalized the teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which labeled same-sex attraction as sinful. He recalled the church's stern rhetoric and the writings of its apostles, such as Dallin H. Oaks, his own grandfather, and a prominent church leader, which reinforced a culture of condemnation toward homosexuality. Oaks discussed how this environment not only led to emotional distress, but also created a backdrop for potential violence. When we are taught that others are morally corrupt or dangerous for how they love, we create an environment ripe for violence, he said. Oaks's early years were marked by confusion and a desire to suppress his sexuality, influenced by church teachings that left him feeling dirty for his attractions. While serving a 2-year mission in Sweden, he conformed to church expectations, but upon returning to the U.S., he faced the reality of his identity as he transitioned to Brigham Young University. His time at BYU, known for its strict honor code, proved to be a pivotal moment when he defended friends who were reported for their same-sex relationship, despite being deeply closeted himself, igniting a realization that his own identity could no longer be repressed. After years of navigating his faith and sexuality, Oaks eventually distanced himself from the church while still engaging with its music community. His relationship with his family, particularly with his grandfather, has been strained. While Jared revealed his sexuality to his parents in 2011, their response was muted, simply responding to his confession with, "Okay." Dallin H. Oaks, for his part, offered little more than a reminder to remain part of the church's rituals, highlighting a disconnect that left Jared feeling unsupported during a critical period of self-acceptance. This article and the previous one certainly portrayed Dallas a little differently. The official church narrative paints Dallas as the ideal, kind, and approachable Christian patriarch, whose chief desire is that his 104 direct descendants follow Jesus Christ, a man who spent his time among the marginalized. In stark contrast, his grandson, Jared, revealed a childhood marked by emotional distress and suppression directly caused by the church's teachings, often reinforced by his own grandfather's prominent rhetoric that labeled same-sex attraction as sinful. Jared's journey from a closeted Latter-day Saint teenager to an LGBTQ+ advocate highlights the painful tension between the church's ideal of family unity and the reality of its exclusionary doctrine. While serving a mission and attending BYU, Jared internalized his grandfather's and church teachings that made him feel dirty for his actions, a process that led him to distance himself from the church. And even after confessing his sexuality, the response from his family, including Dallas, was a strained silence and a mere reminder to remain in church rituals, illustrating a profound disconnect where institutional compliance superseded genuine familial support and acceptance. Back to the article. In a world where rhetoric from religious leaders can lead to tangible harm, Jared Oakes emphasizes the importance of love and acceptance. He contrasts the teachings of his grandfather with the broader, more inclusive messages he encounters within the Latter-day Saint community. Many of my Latter-day Saint friends do not act and speak with anything but love for everyone, he noted, asserting that they represent a true church of compassion. Oakes has recently composed a piece titled Bleeding, inspired by a poem by Utah poet Mae Swenson for the concert Life After Laramie, a Matthew Shepard memorial concert. The piece will be performed by transgender singer Evie Marie Gilgen, a close friend of Oakes. He believes that the act of bleeding symbolizes not just physical pain, but the emotional and spiritual wounds inflicted by societal and religious intolerance. He remains hopeful for a future where love is celebrated rather than condemned, urging leaders like his grandfather to recognize the profound impact of their words and teachings. The knife doesn't have to feel the pain. The cut does, he said, emphasizing the need for awareness and change within religious discourse surrounding LGBTQ+ issues. Now let's go to the Deseret News again for a different article that says, governments suffering the catastrophic effects of plunging birth rates must light the fire of faith within their borders, a Catholic economist and demographer said Tuesday at a BYU Forum Assembly. The highest motive is to want a child for the child's own sake. Usually this type of motive is nourished by a living religious tradition, said Catherine Ruth Pokaluk, a social scientist and economics professor at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. She said choosing to have children, and especially choosing to have more than one child, is a countercultural choice in America today. Pause. By labeling the religious motive as the highest, she immediately creates a moral hierarchy that places all other motivations, love, fulfillment, legacy, natural desire, partnership, on a lower rung. This is loaded language that assigns superior virtue to religious adherence without providing empirical evidence that religious parents are inherently better or more selflessly motivated than secular ones. Back to the article. Governments around the world are scrambling as their birth rates plunge below the replacement rate of 2.0 children per woman. The results spell big trouble, she said. Fewer children means fewer workers, which leads to economic stagnation, sagging government revenue, and more political tension over government spending. Those in turn lead to populism and nationalism. Pause again. For me, this argument fails to account for how countries actually adapt to low birth rates. Migration can easily offset a population decline and labor shortage. Investment in technology, automation, and education can increase productivity per worker, maintaining or boosting economic output despite a shrinking labor pool. Countries can encourage greater participation from underrepresented groups, and lower population growth can reduce environmental strain, ease housing costs, and shift resources from childcare toward innovation, potentially leading to a higher material standard of living per capita. Back to the article, the answer is to stop asking why women aren't having children and start asking why some do. BYU's Wheatley Institute sponsored Pokaluk's research into that question. Her resulting advice to governments is to adopt a program of relentless deference to churches as the providers of a public good that nations cannot buy. She said political leaders should bring religious believers into policy conversations, learn their worldviews, and ask their advice. Let churches run schools and pass on their values, and don't spend people's tax money on things they find evil, she said. Give pride of place in law and policy to religious colleges and universities because they produce more young and fruitful marriages by every measure. Pause again. This directly violates the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment in the U.S., which prohibits the government from establishing a religion or unduly preferring one religion over others. Giving churches and religious colleges pride of place effectively creates a state-preferred class of institution based on religious adherence, fundamentally undermining secular governance. The research assumes that higher birth rates solve complex national problems, and the single solution is religious intervention, but the proposal ignores the primary non-religious drivers of low birth rates, such as economic instability, high cost of living, lack of paid parental leave, and the high cost of childcare. These secular policy solutions are dismissed in favor of religious deference. It also equates the religious transmission of values with a national public good, oversimplifying both the role of religion in society and the economic forces at play. The article goes on to say, her argument is rooted in economics. Large families once were an economic necessity. Multiple children provided parents with help, labor, and support in old age. Having children was the province of marriages. Today, children have been replaced by labor-saving and government support programs. Children are useless for the household, Pakaluk said. The reason birth rates are really falling is because no one needs a child, and fewer people want one, she said. Like horses, children have suffered an economic wound. They've been replaced by other easier, cheaper, better ways to meet organic human needs. So the reasons to have a kid, the gains, for most people don't outweigh those hefty personal costs. Today, people have children only because they want them. Some want to be parents, but having a single child satisfies that self-centered want, Pakaluk said. Wow, did she just assert that the only valid historical reason for having children was labor and support in old age, and that today any other motivation is merely a self-centered want? Declaring that children are useless for the household and comparing them to horses that have suffered an economic wound treats human beings as interchangeable inputs in a production function. This dehumanizing framing dismisses the intrinsic social, familial, and emotional value children provide. Also, I would imagine that the big families of the past had a lot to do with the lack of birth control. Her argument fails to account for the emotional, psychological, and relational value of children. For most parents, the gains are not counted in household labor, but in love, joy, and the unique experience of raising siblings. Asserting that the only reason people want children is a self-centered want that can be satisfied by a single child is a rhetorical slight that dismisses altruistic, relational, or legacy-based desires. It uses moral language to condemn non-traditional family planning choices. The Deseret News goes on to say, religious faith is the spark that causes women to have more children. Children aren't needed, she said, but children can be wanted for their own sakes, and are wanted by people with very specific beliefs about children, illuminated by the fire of faith. Pakaluk said it is an empirical fact that only the highest motive of wanting children brings about above replacement fertility rates, because if every child is a unique, unrepeatable blessing with a destiny only he or she can fulfill, there's no limit to how many you could want. So much to break down here. This assumes that desire is the sole determinant of behavior, entirely ignoring the practical, non-negotiable external constraints that limit family size in industrialized nations, regardless of parental desire. This is a form of the no true Scotsman fallacy applied to causality. If a couple truly had the highest motive, they would have unlimited children, and if they don't, their motive isn't pure enough. Back to the article. The fire of faith is the antivenom to this economic wound children now bear, she said. The ordinary calculus of the world subordinates children to adult needs. By the fire of faith, our hearts are softened and our selfishness burned away. By its light, we seek children when the world seeks comfort. We live for the eternal and not for the present. We discern in the cross the plow of new life. Here she claims that the fire of faith is the antivenom that allows parents to seek children when the world seeks comfort, thus avoiding selfishness. I grew up with 13 siblings in a very devout Mormon family, and the reality was that even under the fire of faith, the practical limitations of resources still governed the day-to-day welfare of me and my siblings. My parents prioritized the religious mandate to have a large family over the practical capacity for them to adequately meet the emotional and material needs of the children they already had. The resulting deficit of attention and resources resulted in institutionalized neglect. My parents' highest need was spiritual obedience and eternal reward, and my siblings' individual needs were subordinated to that higher adult-driven goal. Among other things, we did not always have adequate clothing and were not taught proper hygiene. Faith may inspire the desire for many children, but it cannot miraculously create time, money, and emotional emotional bandwidth necessary to fully satisfy the wants and needs of those children. And on that note, let's go to this video from Scott Henry on Instagram.
I just heard the good news. Congratulations! Out of 50 states, we placed 50th, dead last, in women's equality. 17 different categories, and we were at the bottom of most of them. So ladies, if you're in Utah and you're needing a job, luck isn't gonna be enough. Way to go, Utah! You're killing it! But you can always stay home and make babies. We respect the women's. We can make babies.
Are we surprised? No, we are not. And now, with the permission of a friend of mine, I am going to read her experience when it comes to being a teenager, the LDS Church, and the new garments. She said, I was 15 years old. I'd gotten a new dress I was very excited about and decided to wear it to church. It covered me, clavicle to ankle, in a loose-fitting black fabric. The catch? It was a tank top cut with wide straps at the shoulder, but for the bare shoulders, this dress was pretty conservative. That Saturday evening, my dad and I had discussed some things that were very revelatory to my young mind. The following day was fast and testimony meeting, and I was excited to share what I'd learned from him with my community. I donned my beautiful new dress and, feeling classy, headed off to church with my family. I can still remember walking proudly up the church aisle, ready to share my perspectives. I stood at the microphone speaking of light and darkness, innocently assuming the people there, including the men, wanted to hear what I had to say. When I left class to use the bathroom, the first counselor in our ward passed me in the hallway. He was a married man of middle age, and I was dear friends with his daughters, so I trusted him completely. He pulled me into an empty classroom and shut the door, saying he wanted to talk to me about something important. He told me that in Elders' Quorum, the church meeting for the grown and married men, he had heard several men saying very disturbing things about my appearance that day. He said he wanted to pull me aside to make sure I knew that I was responsible for their thoughts, that many of the young men were preparing for missions, and it was my job to be sure their minds were in the right place. He made it clear that I must never wear this dress again. I'm not summarizing him, I'm quoting him. The shame I felt, not just that I had caused men to have terrible thoughts, but that I had so proudly marched myself up in front of the entire ward that morning. They didn't care about what I had to say. They only cared about how I looked. I never shared my testimony in that ward again. Possibly the saddest part of this story is that because I trusted him, I bought his narrative. I internalized it, and this experience shaped the ways I interacted with men of all ages for many years after. I held several callings working with youth and women, and I passed this wildly broken narrative on to all of them. This experience caused ripples of harm in my life and the lives of others. Many years of therapy later, I realized that what I was told was profoundly messed up. I realized that he should have addressed the men's behavior right then and there in Elders' Quorum, made it clear to them that they were being disgusting, and leadership would not tolerate abuse of the children in the ward in any form. I realized that he never should have spoken to me about it at all. That burden, the one he placed squarely on my literally bare shoulders, should never have been mine to carry. Imagine the feeling of having been put through this and many dozens of other shamey situations, all because of bare shoulder flesh. Imagine that, and then imagine watching videos of Mormon women line up by the hundreds to purchase the new garment design. A garment design that would have, without a doubt, worked with my black Sunday dress. Apparently, Jesus and a bunch of octogenarian men have decided shoulders are now perfectly fine. Imagine trying to express pain and surprise that everything we, the girls and women of the church, were put through was completely unnecessary. Imagine being dismissed by the younger generations of Mormonism. I've been told it was never about modesty, as if little me didn't sit face to face with that narrative at 15. As if I didn't lug it into adulthood, worried what the men will or won't think, afraid of being seen but never heard, desperate for approval. I've never really returned to that confident girl I was that Sunday morning. I'm not alone in these experiences. Every woman I know who grew up Mormon faced immense pressure to keep the men's thoughts pure for them. Turns out Jesus never cared if shoulders were visible, I guess. And now leadership doesn't care either, which begs the question, what was the point? And last up today, let's finish with this great quote that says, "Most non-religious people wouldn't have a problem with religion if it was something benign and privately practiced, instead of something weaponized to oppress people, justify harmful beliefs and rituals, proselytize and convert, and infiltrate government." And that's your update for today, folks. I absolutely hope you have the day that you deserve.